The helicopter's roar split the quiet Sunday morning in two. It hovered over the rolling fields just beyond the edge of town, stirring the tall grasses into a wild, frantic dance. People poured out of their houses in bathrobes and slippers, shielding their eyes against the wind, pointing toward the sky in disbelief. I stood at the edge of the gathering crowd, the blades whipping my hair across my face, heart pounding against my ribs as if trying to break free. I never thought my life would lead me here, standing under a gray, trembling sky, about to reclaim every piece of dignity they once tried to strip away from me. My name is Samantha Clark, and a few months ago, my parents laughed in my face and told me the man I loved wasn't even real. They said he was just a fantasy, a lonely girl's desperate dream, photoshopped into existence to save face. I remember the way my mother had leaned back in her chair, swirling her wine and chuckling as if my heart were a child's scribble on a wall she found amusing. I remember my father's dismissive grunt, the way he turned his attention back to his phone without even bothering to mask the boredom on his face. I had smiled through it then, my throat burning with humiliation, nodding like I understood their concern, like I didn't feel every word slice me open. Now, the wind whipped harder, pulling at jackets and hats as the helicopter began to descend. I could see its sleek black frame against the sky, the symbol on its side gleaming like a promise. The neighbors' murmurs grew louder, a chorus of confusion and wonder threading through the crowd. My parents were somewhere among them, I knew, probably staring in stunned silence, probably questioning everything they thought they knew about me. The ground shook as the helicopter touched down, sending a final rush of wind that tore leaves from the trees and sent them spiraling into the air like confetti. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply waited, my hands steady at my sides, my heart finally quieter than it had been in months. The door swung open slowly, deliberately, like a scene carefully constructed just for this moment. Out of the swirling mist and noise, he stepped onto the grass, real, solid, and infinitely more than anything they could have imagined. And for the first time in my life, it wasn't me who had to explain, to apologize, to prove my worth. For the first time, it was them who would have to reckon with the truth. I had spent the whole morning nervously rearranging the living room. Every pillow fluffed just right, the good china dusted off and waiting, the softest lighting I could manage so the video call would feel warmer, more personal. I even wore the blue sweater my mother once said brought out my eyes. It felt important, more than important. It felt like the beginning of a bridge between two worlds I loved, a chance for them to see what I saw in Amir. The kindness behind his laughter, the steadiness in his gaze, the way his voice could make even the worst days feel manageable. When the laptop finally connected and Amir's smiling face filled the screen, I felt a wave of relief. He looked handsome, a little flushed from the Dubai heat, dressed in a crisp white shirt that made his dark hair stand out even more. He waved, a little shyly, and said, "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Clark. It's so nice to finally meet you." For a moment, there was silence. I held my breath, waiting for some sign of acceptance, some small kindness. Instead, my father snorted, shaking his head. "Well, if that isn't the best Photoshop job I've ever seen," he said, glancing at my mother with a smirk. My mother leaned forward, squinting at the screen like she was examining a forgery. "Honestly, Samantha," she said, laughing lightly, "did you really think we'd fall for a stock photo? Look at him. He doesn't even blink properly. It's all filters these days." Amir's smile faltered just slightly. He tried to laugh it off, but the damage was done. I felt it too, the sharp sting of humiliation blooming hot and fast in my chest. "I'm real," Amir said, with a small chuckle that tried to keep things light. "I promise." But they didn't hear him. They didn't want to. My father was already pulling out his phone, searching up fake fiancé video calls like he was unearthing some grand conspiracy. My mother leaned back with a pitying smile that hurt worse than any shout, shaking her head like I was a child playing dress-up. I sat there, frozen, the room blurring around the edges as their laughter filled the space where hope had just been. I nodded and smiled thinly, my fingers digging into the armrest of the couch. After we ended the call, my mother patted my hand as if comforting a delusional patient. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice syrupy and cruel all at once. "Some girls just aren't meant for fairy tales." I remember staring at the blank laptop screen long after they left the room, Amir's face still echoing behind my eyelids, and wondering when exactly my parents had decided it was easier to mock me than to believe in me. Growing up in my parents' house felt a lot like living inside a museum. Everything gleamed, everything was curated. Our furniture, our clothes, even our conversations at the dinner table. Perfection wasn't a goal. It was an expectation stitched into every breath, every glance. The silverware had to shine, the family photos had to capture only our best angles, and heaven forbid if anyone saw a crack beneath the surface. From the time I could walk, I knew there was a script I was supposed to follow, but somehow my lines always came out wrong. I wasn't loud enough at parties, not polished enough for the Christmas cards, not ambitious enough for the endless list of accomplishments that counted as currency in our world. I didn't crave the spotlight. I craved sincerity. In a house full of glittering performances that made me an anomaly, an inconvenience. When I was younger, I thought love sounded like applause. I thought if I just earned enough gold stars, enough perfect report cards, enough polite smiles from strangers, maybe they'd look at me and see someone worth loving. But the truth was colder and much simpler. I was a reflection they didn't want. My parents built their lives like a glass castle, towering and delicate, beautiful from the outside but impossible to breathe inside. Every flaw was hidden behind thick curtains. Every misstep was a family shame. And I, quiet, soft-hearted, hopelessly idealistic, was the crack they could never quite polish away. Even now, years later, standing in that living room with Amir's laughter still fading from the air, I could feel the invisible wall that had always been there. No matter how hard I pressed against it, it held. Unforgiving, silent, cold. To them, I was the dreamer who mistook fiction for reality, the soft one, the foolish one, the daughter too naive to understand the rules of the world they worshipped. And when they laughed at Amir, when they called him fake and pitiful, they weren't just mocking him. They were confirming what they had always believed about me. In their eyes, love wasn't something pure or miraculous. It was a transaction, a glossy resume, a shiny pedigree, a prize to parade. Anything less was embarrassing. Anything real was dangerous. I sat there that night after the call ended, the polished family portraits staring down at me from the mantel. Smiling faces frozen in time, smiling faces that had never quite belonged to me. In the home I grew up in, I had learned the hard way. You could be born into a family and still be nothing more than a stranger living among them. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, one of those gray, unremarkable days where the hours slip by unnoticed. I was visiting my parents' house, helping my mother sort through old paperwork. She was in the other room when her phone buzzed loudly on the kitchen counter, lighting up with a new message. I wasn't trying to pry. I wasn't even curious. But the screen caught my eye, my sister's name flashing brightly across it, followed by a laughing emoji. Something in my chest tightened. Against my better judgment, I glanced at the preview. Still think she's dating a real person? Poor thing. My fingers froze around the envelope I was sorting. I told myself to look away, to let it go. But my body moved before my mind could catch up, lifting the phone, unlocking it without thinking, muscle memory from years of family errands and shared calendars. The group chat was called Family Matters. Inside, message after message scrolled, past, each one cutting deeper than the last. My mother. I mean, at her age, wouldn't you want to believe in a fairy tale too? My father. Scammer, plain and simple. Watch, she'll be crying for money by Christmas. My sister. Should we stage an intervention or just let her learn the hard way? And then, casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, my name dragged through the mud by the people who were supposed to love me most. Pathetic, my father had written. Always was. I don't know how long I stood there, the phone heavy and burning in my hand. The world around me blurred and dimmed until all I could hear was the slow, pounding echo of my own heartbeat. Pathetic. The word stuck to me like tar, thick and suffocating. I placed the phone back exactly where I found it, careful, deliberate, as if I could somehow erase the moment by retracing my steps. But the damage was already done. A jagged crack had split through whatever fragile illusion of family I had left. When my mother returned, she smiled at me like nothing had changed. She asked if I wanted tea, if I would stay for dinner. Her voice was light, almost musical. I think that hurt the most, the easy cruelty hidden behind everyday kindness. I made an excuse about work and left early, stepping out into the gray, damp air. I walked down the street, past the neatly trimmed hedges and polished windows of my childhood neighborhood, feeling more alone than I ever had before. That night, lying in bed staring up at the ceiling, I realized something cold and undeniable. My family didn't just doubt Amir, they doubted me. They didn't believe I was worth trusting, worth standing behind, worth believing in. And if that was the foundation we had built everything on, then maybe it wasn't me who was foolish after all. Maybe it was time to stop trying to build a home inside walls that had always been meant to keep me out. Amir noticed it almost immediately. The distance in my voice when we spoke, the way I hesitated before answering his calls, the fragile smile I forced whenever he told me he missed me. He never pushed, never accused. He simply waited, his patience wrapping around me like a soft blanket, until I couldn't carry the weight of silence anymore. One evening, as the sky outside my window turned the color of bruised peaches, he asked quietly, "Samantha, what's wrong?" There was no judgment in his voice, no irritation, just a quiet knowing that undid the last thread of composure I had left. I tried to brush it off at first, saying I was just tired, that work was stressful, that it was nothing. But the words crumbled in my mouth, brittle and false. I pressed the heel of my hand into my eyes, feeling the hot sting of tears I hadn't given myself permission to cry. "They don't believe you're real," I whispered, the confession small and broken. "They think you're some scam. Oh, fantasy. They laugh about it when they think I'm not looking." For a heartbeat, there was only silence between us. I didn't dare look at the screen. I couldn't stand to see the hurt I was sure would be there, but when Amir spoke, his voice was warm, touched with something almost like amusement. "Well," he said, a soft chuckle threading through the line, "maybe it's time they saw what they're missing." I blinked, confused, finally lifting my gaze to find him smiling. Not the brittle, forced smile I had worn so many times, but a real one. Calm, steady, unshaken. "They don't get to decide who you are, Samantha," he said. "They don't get to decide who we are." A tear slipped down my cheek, and before I could wipe it away, he added, "Besides, I've been working on something. A little surprise." I tilted my head, wary but curious. "What kind of surprise?" He just grinned wider, a mischievous glint sparking in his dark eyes. "You'll see," he said. "Trust me." And for the first time in weeks, the tight band around my chest loosened just a little. His faith in me, so effortless, so complete, felt like a balm on a wound I hadn't even realized was still bleeding. Whatever he was planning, I knew one thing. Amir wasn't going to fight them, with anger or with shouting matches. He was going to show them the truth, and this time, I wouldn't be standing alone. The invitation arrived in a heavy cream envelope, the kind that suggested formality, importance, and most importantly, exclusivity. My parents found it waiting, on their doorstep one bright Saturday morning, tucked neatly among the usual clutter of catalogs and bills. It was addressed simply to the Clark family, written in a bold, elegant hand. No return address, no sender, just the weight of it, the mystery of it, pulling them in. Inside was a single card, thick and smooth to the touch. In the center, in simple black script, it read, "Please come. It's time to meet in person." Beneath the message, an address, an old estate on the edge of town, known for hosting weddings and charity galas. And a time, Sunday noon, no explanation, no signature. Just a quiet challenge, carefully dressed as an invitation. I wasn't there when they opened it, but I can imagine the way my mother's eyes would have lit up, the way my father would have grunted his approval. An event at a prestigious location? A chance to parade their superiority, their finely honed skepticism? It was irresistible. They didn't suspect a thing. Not yet. In their minds, this was the moment they would finally rip the mask off the fantasy I had built. They still believed Amir was a fabrication, a lie I was too embarrassed, or too desperate, to let go of. They thought they were going to confront me in front of witnesses, expose the farce, maybe even humiliate me into coming to my senses. Pity coated their voices when they spoke about it later that evening, making plans, speculating on what kind of scam artist would go to such elaborate lengths. I just hope she's not too heartbroken, my mother sighed, already imagining herself as the gracious, sorrowful matriarch. She'll thank us eventually, my father said, ever the pragmatist. They didn't realize they were walking straight into a mirror that would show them, for the first time, exactly who they had become. As they ironed their best clothes and polished their shoes, they weren't preparing for victory. They were preparing for a reckoning they couldn't yet see, and I, sitting quietly in my small apartment, rereading the simple card Amir had sent out in secret, felt the first stirrings of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger, not vengeance, just a quiet, powerful certainty. It was time. The morning of the brunch broke heavy and low, the sky sagging under the weight of thick, slate-colored clouds. The kind of sky that feels like it's holding its breath, waiting for something inevitable to shatter loose. I stood by the window of my apartment, watching the wind tear through the trees, leaves spinning like lost confessions across the street. There was a certain poetry to it, I thought. The storm gathering on the day everything was meant to come to light. No clear skies, no bright beginnings. Just an honest, raw reflection of the way my heart had felt for months now. Unsteady, fierce, bracing for impact. My dress hung on the closet door, waiting for me. It wasn't flashy, wasn't meant to impress. A simple slate blue fabric that caught the light softly, brushing just above my knees. It wasn't armor. It wasn't a costume. It was just me, unadorned, without apology. I took my time getting ready, every movement deliberate. A small pearl pendant around my neck, barely their makeup. Shoes I could walk confidently in, not totter like I was trying to be someone else. I looked in the mirror before leaving. I didn't see the girl they had spent so many years trying to mold or belittle. I saw a woman who had stopped asking permission to exist. Still, underneath the calm, a current of nerves buzzed low and urgent. Would they laugh again? Would they twist today into another reason to look down at me with pity and smugness? The thought drifted through my mind, but it didn't root itself there the way it once would have. Instead, a strange, unexpected feeling was rising in me, something steadier, sharper, power, not the kind that needed to shout or break things to be heard. The quiet kind. The kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are and exactly what you're walking away from, even if the people around you will never understand it. Outside, the first drops of rain began to tap against the window pane, slow and deliberate. I slipped on my coat, wrapped my fingers around the doorknob, and breathed in deeply. Whatever storm waited beyond the estate's gates, whatever truths were about to come crashing down around us, I knew this much. I wouldn't meet it hiding. I wouldn't meet it begging for their approval. I would walk into it standing tall, steady in my own skin. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. The estate was even grander than I remembered. An old Georgian structure with sprawling lawns, ancient trees bending under the weight of the rising storm. Guests milled about the terrace, champagne glasses glittering in their hands, conversations flowing with the practiced ease of people used to wearing masks. I kept to the edges, unnoticed, the muted roar of their voices washing over me like background noise. My parents were easy to spot. My father in a stiff navy suit, my mother in pearls that sat heavy against her throat. They moved through the crowd with effortless grace, the king and queen of an invisible court, basking in the attention. The sky, Above us churned, dark and restless, as if the earth itself was holding back a breath. I felt it before I heard it. A low, distant rumble that wasn't thunder. Heads turned upward, confused. Conversations faltered. Glasses trembled in nervous fingers. And then we saw it, slicing through the clouds, a sleek black helicopter, its blades whirring against the steel-colored sky. The ground vibrated beneath us as it descended, sending gusts of wind whipping through the crowd. Hats flew, hands shielded faces. My mother clutched her jacket closed with a frown, her composure slipping for the first time that day. The helicopter touched down with a final rush of air that flattened the grass and rattled the champagne flutes. The door swung open slowly, deliberately, like the opening act of a carefully staged performance. And there he was. Amir stepped out into the storm-heavy afternoon, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, understated but immaculate, the kind that spoke without ever needing to raise its voice. His presence alone seemed to shift the air around him, pulling every gaze toward him with magnetic force. He crossed the lawn without hurry, each step measured, unbothered by the gawking stares or the murmured speculations rippling through the crowd. His eyes found mine first, steady, unwavering, and for a moment, the rest of the world fell away. Then he turned to the gathering crowd, offering a polite, almost amused smile, as if he'd just stumbled into a garden party by chance. But there was a precision to it, a quiet authority that needed no announcement. I watched as realization dawned, across the faces of the people around me, the neighbors, the socialites, the relatives who had always looked down on me. I watched my parents stiffen, the color draining from my mother's cheeks, my father's mouth tightening into a hard, thin line. Amir was not a scammer. He was not a fantasy. He was here. He was real. And he was more extraordinary than anything they could have ever imagined. The hush that had fallen over the terrace deepened as Amir approached my parents. There was no tension in his stride, no bitterness etched into his face. Only calm, measured steps, and a faint, courteous smile that seemed to pull the rug from under every assumption in the room. My mother recovered first, or at least tried to. She smoothed the front of her jacket, pasting on a gracious smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My father stiffened beside her, his hands clasped behind his back like a soldier bracing for an unexpected inspection. Amir stopped before them, offering his hand first to my mother. "Mrs. Clark," he said warmly, his voice carrying over the stunned silence. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." She hesitated, just for a second, before taking his hand. I saw the way her fingers faltered against his steady grip, the way her smile strained under the weight of disbelief. "And you, Mr. Clark," Amir continued, turning to my father with the same effortless grace. Their handshake was brief, tight, my father's attempt to assert dominance dissolving uselessly against Amir's unshakable composure. There was a beat of silence, heavy and expectant. My parents stood frozen, their expressions flickering, between confusion and forced politeness. Amir gave them an easy, disarming smile. "Thank you for coming today. I know how much family means to Samantha. She speaks about you often." The words were smooth, generous even, but I knew him well, enough to catch the subtle glint beneath them. He was laying down a mirror, polished and unflinching, daring them to see themselves in it. My mother recovered enough to murmur something about being delighted to meet him at last. My father cleared his throat, searching for a footing that no longer existed. Amir continued, his tone light but purposeful. "I'm based between Dubai and London these days. I run several businesses there, tech startups mostly. Logistics, finance, a bit of real estate development on the side." He said it simply, without bravado, but each word landed like a silent thunderclap. I watched it unfold, the slow dawning horror on my parents' faces as their carefully crafted narrative collapsed around them. The way my father's jaw tightened. The way my mother's nails dug into the soft leather strap of her purse. They had been so sure they would find a fraud. A desperate man clinging to their daughter's naivety. Instead, they were staring at a man whose presence outshone every room he walked into. A man who had nothing to prove and everything to offer. The champagne in my mother's glass trembled. slightly as she lifted it to her lips. My father's next question died unspoken in the back of his throat. And me? I stood a few steps away, watching it all with a calm that felt almost sacred. Not because I needed their approval, not because I needed their apology, but because for the first time, they had to sit in the space they had carved for me. The space where they were small and wrong and deeply, deeply out of their depth. The brunch stretched on under a thin veneer of politeness. The conversation stilted, every laugh a little too loud, every smile a little too forced. My parents tried to recover, tried to gather the frayed edges of their pride and stitch them back together with idle questions and compliments that landed with a hollow thud between us. Amir moved through the crowd effortlessly, disarming and gracious, never once needing to rub their mistake in their faces. His very existence, his undeniable reality, was enough. He didn't need to say a word about the months of mockery, the cruel jokes, the private chats that had carved bruises under my skin. He had already won without lifting a single weapon, and I stood with them, answered their questions, smiled. At their attempts to drag me back into the illusion of family we had all pretended existed for far too long. But something fundamental had shifted, something invisible but irreversible. I wasn't seeking their approval anymore. I wasn't reaching for scraps of affection they were too proud or too shallow to offer freely. I listened as my mother cooed about how handsome and impressive Amir was, as my father awkwardly tried to steer the conversation toward common business interests. I nodded when appropriate, let the words wash over me like rain against a closed window. They didn't realize that every polished compliment, every backhanded attempt to fold me neatly back into their world, only pushed me further away. Because love shouldn't come at the price of humiliation. It shouldn't hinge on how closely you fit the picture someone else paints for their own convenience. They had shown me, without meaning to, exactly where I stood in their lives, and now I was simply choosing to believe them. When we said our goodbyes, my mother clutched my hands too tightly, her smile trembling at the edges. "We should have dinner soon," she said, her voice light, desperate. "Just the family." I smiled back, gentle but immovable. "Maybe," I said. No promises, no invitations, no illusions. As Amir and I walked away across the lawn, the storm breaking softly above us into a steady cleansing rain, I felt no bitterness, no rage, no desperate need to be understood. Only peace. Some victories aren't loud. Some don't come with grand speeches or shattered glass. Some victories are quiet, a door closing with finality, a heart no longer begging to be seen, a life stepping forward without looking back. And that, I realized as we disappeared into the soft mist of the afternoon, was the sweetest revenge of all. I used to believe that family was something unchangeable, a fact etched into stone the day you were born. That blood meant loyalty, and shared history meant love. It's what I clung to for so long, even when the cracks grew too wide to ignore, even when the people who should have protected me were the ones tearing me down behind closed doors. But standing there on the rain-slick lawn, Amir's hand warm and steady in mine, I saw it clearly for the first time. Family isn't blood. It isn't last names or shared traditions or old photo albums lined up neatly on a shelf. Family is kindness that doesn't have to be earned. It's pride that doesn't come with conditions. It's respect that doesn't disappear the moment. You stop being convenient, and if that didn't come from the people who raised me, then maybe they were never truly my family at all. Maybe family is something you choose, something you build, one small act of love at a time. Amir squeezed my hand gently as we reached the car, his thumb brushing over my knuckles in a way that said more than words ever could. A quiet promise. A shared understanding. We didn't speak as we pulled away from the estate, the gravel crunching softly beneath the tires, the misty rain blurring the world behind us into a watercolor of muted grays and greens. I didn't look back. Not once. There was nothing left for me in that place. No roots worth salvaging, no ghosts I needed to chase down for answers they would never be able to give. The future stretched out in front of us, open and uncertain and vast. But for the first time in my life, the uncertainty didn't terrify me. It thrilled me, because I wasn't walking into it alone. I had chosen my family, not out of duty, not out of fear, but out of something infinitely more powerful, out of hope, out of love, out of the quiet, resilient knowledge that the people who stand beside you by choice, who lift you when you stumble and celebrate when you rise, they are the only family that ever truly matters. The rain softened into a fine mist, silver against the windshield, as we drove farther from the past and closer to something new, and for the first time in a long, long time, I felt free. The helicopter waited for us at the far end of the field, its blades idle, the rain misting softly over its sleek frame. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, the air sharp and new. We walked toward it hand in hand, the wet grass brushing against my ankles, the sky above us cracked open into streaks of silver and pale blue. Each step felt lighter than the last, as if the earth itself was releasing me from the heavy weight of everything I was leaving behind. Amir helped me into the cabin, his hand firm at my back, and for a moment, as the door closed and the world outside faded into a muffled hush, I allowed myself to simply breathe. To exist in this perfect, fragile moment. The pilot gave a brief nod, and then the blades roared back to life, slicing through the damp air with a force that rattled through my bones. I watched the ground fall away beneath us, the estate shrinking into a patchwork of manicured gardens and gravel paths, the town folding into itself like a story already finished. The higher we climbed, the smaller it all became. The hurt, the betrayals, the years I spent trying to fit into a mold that was never meant for me. They scattered into the mist like loose pages torn from a book I no longer needed to read. I turned to Amir, who was watching me with that same steady patience he always carried, like he knew exactly what this moment meant without me having to say a word. I smiled, a small, real smile, and laced my fingers through his. The town disappeared completely beneath a sea of clouds, and before us stretched nothing but open sky, endless and waiting. I realized then that the life I had been fighting so hard for wasn't down there, buried in old wounds and empty promises. It was here, in the fierce quiet of new beginnings, in the impossible lightness of choosing myself. The sky is ours now. No maps, no expectations, no walls built by someone else's fear or pride. Just the endless hum of possibility and the steady beat of a heart finally unafraid. As we soared higher into the clouds, leaving behind everything that had once tried to define me, I closed my eyes and let the future rush in, not broken, not bitter, just free.